So the Dhamma for today is called Parisuddhasīla from the Visuddhimagga. It describes the fourfold purification of ethics, sila. Sila is a word that more literally means normal, but the idea is that the normal for a person, or it could be the norm for a society, that sort of thing. So it's a way of describing one's behavior or one's way of life. Really, ethics is very much about one's way of life. It refers to not only one's immediate activities, physical actions, but the surrounding way of life, including livelihood and daily chores and activities that form a foundation and a guardrail sort of for the rest of the practice. So the Buddha said, "Sile patithaya," one having stood on sila, one goes on to develop concentration and wisdom. So sila is the very foundation, and like a building, it relies on a strong foundation. Of course, any sort of weakness or structural imperfection in the foundation is going to reflect on the rest of the building and make it impossible to build a structurally sound building. So it's the beginning of the spiritual life, and it's also the foundation, which means it's not something that you can undertake at the start and then put aside for the rest. It's something that has to carry with you not only throughout your course of practice, but throughout your life. And that's really the sense in which sila becomes a part of your life and incorporates or deals with the many aspects that not necessarily partake directly of the practice, but support the practice. And so this is where we get these four different aspects of what it means to have both this foundation and this guard that will protect us throughout our practice, and more directly even lead us to the others. You can think of sila as being that which pushes us towards or drives us towards the right direction, instead of allowing us to go in the wrong direction. All the power that comes from meditation practice and self-investigation and so on, that power could deviate from the correct path without this sort of guard that keeps us going in the right direction, the guardrails, if you will. So the four aspects of sila which make it pure and which lead to the higher purifications. The first one is called Patimokkha Samvara Sila. So the ethics or the behavior or the norm, which are the rules, or precepts that we keep. So the first thing we learn as Buddhists is about the 5 precepts. Someone who wishes to call themselves a Buddhist must necessarily be able to keep, at least for the most part, these 5 precepts, meaning if you break them from time to time, someone could still rehabilitate themselves. But if someone is ignorant or abusive of these 5 precepts, one can never really call oneself a follower of the Buddha. Killing living beings, be it animals or human beings, stealing, if one ever is engaged in theft, or if one engages it as a part of one's life. Sexual impropriety, so adultery, cheating on others, or going behind your partner's back, that sort of thing. Lying, so any kind of speech that is against reality. So it doesn't mean failing to tell the truth. It is ethical sometimes to not tell the truth, but it's never ethical to say something that you know is not true for the purpose of um, for the purpose of misleading someone else. And number 5, drugs and alcohol. So if one is, of course, engaged in intoxication, inebriation, it's difficult, if not impossible, to cultivate mindfulness and clarity of mind, and so one's mind will always be polluted and easily subject to any kind of greed or anger or delusion that one may have in the mind. So these are the basis of ethics, and these are the strongest, the most vital of the ethical rules that we have. But even these rules, if kept, do not necessarily ensure that one is headed in the right direction. The problem with rules is they're only like fence posts, meaning you can still slip between the cracks, obviously. What fence posts are good for mostly is to show you the limit, the line, the border that you should never cross. You should never go outside this. But it doesn't mean that you won't go outside of this just because you keep these. Obviously, you can avoid killing and still harm others. You can avoid stealing and you can still manipulate, or you can hoard your wealth and be stingy, miserly, jealous, and so on. And all of these are essential for right ethics, but rules will never fully free us from the potential for unwholesomeness, obviously. So one thing we do is we add more rules. For someone who undertakes meditation practices, we refine these rules to give you a better sense and to do a better job of keeping you within the boundaries. So a person who comes to practice meditation undertakes celibacy, meaning no sexual or romantic activity whatsoever. Engages in moderation in eating, so only eating enough to live. We only eat in the morning. Not engaging in entertainment, so no kind of playing games or watching shows or listening to music or that sort of thing. We give up beautification, so any kind of makeup or jewelry or fancy clothes or that sort of thing. And we give up sleep, so we sleep only as much as is necessary. We try to sleep on a simple bedding and do our best to be vigilant, not to oversleep, not to sleep more than is absolutely necessary. For new meditators, we say the limit is 6 hours, and slowly try to work down to 4 hours by the end of the course. But again, even these, well, a person, what you can say is a person who doesn't keep the 5 precepts, as I said, is not really a good Buddhist. You could also say they're not a very good human. So a human being who breaks these could not really be considered a proper human being. It means when they die, it's not likely that they're going to be reborn a human being again, if they are constantly and habitually breaking the 5 precepts. A person who keeps the 5 but breaks the 8, if one breaks the precepts for a meditator, it's very difficult for them to progress on the path of meditation. Very unlikely that they're going to succeed or gain any great distinction to get closer to the goal of freedom from suffering. And finally, we have the rules of a monastic. So a novice will undertake to not take not use gold or silver, to not have any kind of wealth of any sort. And a bhikkhu, a monk, will undertake many, many rules of the community in far greater detail. So we keep these many, many rules, and this is our guidance that the Buddha gave it. The Buddha called this the Vinaya. Vinaya means that which guides you out, means guides you away from the wrong practices. If you know in general all the bad things to do, and for a Buddhist monk there are many things that are considered bad. As I said, for a novice you undertake to not use even money. Now there's nothing unethical about money, but through experience in a monastic setting you start to see how obviously a monk engaging in monetary transactions of any sort gets distracted and pulled away from the path. So all of these things When we give up, when we keep these precepts, it helps to lead us away from temptation, away from being triggered by greed or anger or delusion. So it's the beginning of ethics, and it's the easiest, the most clear, and it's vital. Without these, it's like without a fence post, you couldn't keep the fence up. So someone could say, I don't need precepts, I'm not going to keep them, I'm still going to be mindful. Very unlikely that they're going to succeed. It's like their fence doesn't have any posts to keep it up. So they say, I have this fence, and they're constantly going to be escaping, just like animals would escape from a fence without any fence posts. They just trample it down. If you break these precepts, if you aren't keeping these precepts, even if you just ignore them, it's very difficult for you to have a general sense of what's important. For monks, we recite our 227 rules every 2 weeks for that purpose of reminding us how important these are and how valuable they are. That being said, again, as I've said, these are not the be-all, end-all of ethics, and they aren't a replacement for the more important and more real sort of ethics, which is the second part. The second part is called Indriya Samvara Sila. Indriya Samvara Sila means ethics, which is the guarding of one's faculties. And I mentioned about the 5 faculties, but this is referring to the 6 faculties. It's a different set. The 6 faculties here means the 6 doors of perception. The eye door, the ear door, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind door. These 6 doors are the doors to perception. Everything we experience will be through one or another of these doors. They were enumerated by the Buddha for that purpose, to give you a sense of every type of experience that you could possibly have. A reminder that it's actually quite simple. Experience can be categorized in 6 ways. And if you guard these 6, there's nothing else you have to worry about. There are no other doors, there are no other avenues by which greed, anger, or delusion could take over and consume your mind. No other doors by which suffering could be grown or cultivated. So this describes in one way our practice of mindfulness. And so you can see how mindfulness goes from sila, from ethics, to concentration, to wisdom. Mindfulness really is the catalyst which leads us from one stage of the path to the next, all the way to the end. How? By noting our experiences as they occur, we are, by that very means, guarding the 6 sense doors. The Buddha described mindfulness as the guard, like a doorkeeper. A doorkeeper doesn't block the door, doesn't lock the door, doesn't keep the door from opening, doesn't keep people from going in and out through the gate of a city, say. But they are guarding the city to make sure that only people who have a right, who it's proper to let in, are allowed in, and making sure that those people that come in don't misbehave and so on. The guard of the door is the practice of mindfulness. So for example, if you see something and you say to yourself, seeing, you keep your mind pure. And that purity only allows the sight to come in. It doesn't allow for any liking of it, any disliking of it, even any judgment, even any extrapolation or investigation of it. It keeps seeing as just seeing. It keeps you in contact with the reality. And this is what is called the guarding sati samvara, the guarding through mindfulness. Even when the defilements arise, as I've said, if you note the defilements, you purify them and you stop them from reaching in and growing and really taking root in your heart. Even liking is just liking, disliking is just disliking, and so on. But mindfulness is an aspect of sila. The practice of sila is accomplished through the practice of mindfulness. And as a result, the mind becomes focused, the mind becomes in focus, in the sense of the mind not being distorted through defilement. And this is what, of course, allows for the arising of samadhi, which is what sila is for the purpose. But this is familiar to you. I don't have to go into great detail about this. Regarding the senses is how we note seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting. I could say about feeling is that it may not be exactly clear, but that is also what we're doing when we note the body movements. When your body moves, stepping right, stepping left, or lifting, placing, or so on. The noting of those movements, as you know that this is lifting and so on, this is again guarding the body sense, which might not have been apparent, but we have the feeling, the sense of feeling. So all the feelings in the body you're learning how to guard. And of course you can guard if you have any kind of tension, you can guard it from becoming stress or worry about the tension or disliking it. Even a headache can be taken just as the sensation of the tension in the head. And if you keep it at just the tension, then it's not painful, it's not upsetting, it's not a problem. It doesn't lead to problems, it doesn't lead to reactions. And finally, the mind as the sixth door. So normally we talk about the five senses. In worldly parlance, we say the five senses. Well, obviously the mind is not any one of those five senses, and yet it's still experience. Some experiences are purely mental. You could see things in your mind or hear things, but it could also just be thinking. And so thinking is a purely mental activity. When there's thinking, you can say to yourself, thinking, thinking, and again, not trying to stop the thinking, just as you're not trying to stop the seeing or the hearing. Thinking is just thinking, and you keep it at that, guarding it. This is what a guard is for. A guard is not like a bully repressing or pushing away, not trying not to see, trying not to hear, none of that. It's the guard that keeps things in line, keeps the experiences from getting out of hand. So this is guarding the senses is the second type. And this is really the essence of our practice. So some people might think to stop there, and really, technically, that's all it takes to practice. But as I said, Sila is about the rest of your life. All of the things that go on when you're not practicing or in tandem with your practice. So during your practice, you also have to eat. You also have to bathe, you also have to sleep, you also need a room or a place. You need a meditation center, you need a hut for you to stay in, and so a room for you to stay in, and so on. And so for people living in the world, this becomes a real issue. This is called, the third one is called livelihood, Ajiva Parisuddhasīla. Ethics through the purification of one's livelihood. Now for us living in the monastery, it's much simpler, but when living in the world, living a worldly life, and for some of you who are going back to that, you have to answer these questions. How is my life affecting my meditation practice? Obviously there are many things I'm going to have to do besides just walking and sitting in meditation. And it's important that you take time to reflect and to consider what is appropriate livelihood. Obviously, things like selling weapons or poisons or drugs and alcohol, human trafficking, even selling meat and that sort of thing, these things are considered to be wrong livelihood, and for good reason, because they interfere with your practice. Your morality is not pure if all of these things are taking away from the clarity of mind or making you feel guilty, making you feel bad. If you're killing for a livelihood, stealing for a livelihood, cheating, lying for a livelihood is a big one that can cause lots of problems. So it's not simple, and it's not as simple as having good intentions, and you can't simply ignore these things, because absolutely, if you let them go, if you let your livelihood go wild, if you get caught up in livelihood, it can of course detract quite significantly from your progress on the path. Now here in the meditation center, we still have to think about livelihood, and we still have to have a pure sort of livelihood. Obviously monks, when we go on alms round, we have to be pure, we can't be begging, we can't be asking for food. And meditators have to be the same. You have to be content with what you get, you have to be mindful, and as I've said, you have to help out with the monastery. Part of your livelihood here is taking care of the meditation center, so you're responsible for cleaning up after yourself, but also cleaning up the monastery. There are some things like nature. Nature causes lots of messes, like leaves and so on. You're responsible for cleaning the toilets. You have livelihood here. You have some sort of job that you have to perform as a part of the community. This is still part of it. The idea behind livelihood, though, most importantly, is how you get your requisites, and so it's much streamlined here in the meditation center, where you don't have to worry about food. You're perfectly pure in your livelihood, because the food here is given out of faith. People are giving the food because of what you're doing. A big part of the reason why people are so happy and so keen to bring us food every day and to give food on alms round is because they know this is a meditation center and they know that we're practicing the true teachings of the Buddha, that we're engaged in altruistic means, that we're here for the right reasons, and that we are dedicating ourselves to this, that we are practicing meditation. So all of you are a big part of that, and a big reason why our livelihood is able to be this pure, that we don't have to go seeking out food or seeking out requisites of any kind. People are donating and supporting our center because of the confidence they have in what we're doing. So the purity is in many ways accomplished just by being here and just by doing the right work. But for our purposes, we are mindful of this, that, as I said, we try not to be needy or greedy, that we're content with little, and that we take only what is given. So the food that is given, we're content with that, even though it might not be the food that we would prefer. Our rooms are often not perfect and not what we would like most of all. They might not even be the best suitable for us in meditation practice, but as I've said, more important than the experiences that we have being the most suitable, more importantly is our state of mind. And so if we are content, even with imperfect lodging or medicine or food or clothes or whatever, that contentment is worth much more than the requisites themselves. So this is livelihood purification. The fourth one is related to this, not about how we get our requisites, but how we use them. It's called Paccaya Paccavekkhana Sila. This means ethics through reflecting on the use of requisites. So reflecting on the use of the things that we have to use. And this you can see most clearly, again, in worldly life, where our requisites become many, many different things. Cars and telephones and houses and so on. Electronics and devices, kitchens and alarm clocks and all of these things that we need to use. And of course there's nothing wrong with that. One shouldn't feel guilty for having to use an alarm clock or a telephone or a refrigerator or a microwave or anything like that. But all of these things should be used carefully, because obviously in the world it's not simply a matter of utility. We buy cars that we don't need, we wear clothes that we don't need, we eat food that is not good for us, we consume electronics and entertainment that is in no way good for us or beneficial or leading to peace and happiness and freedom from suffering. And so we engage with so many different things without reflection. Now, this is something that, as I said, doesn't make people a bad Buddhist, as long as they're not stealing or lying or cheating. But for us in the meditation center, and for those who are dedicated to practice even in the world, there should be some sort of sense of moderation and limiting the effects that these things have on our mind and on our practice. So obviously we have to consider, am I using this for good? These things that I have, this food, we reflect on the use of food and we consider not to eat too much, not to eat too little. If we eat too little, we'll have painful feelings. If we eat too much, we'll also have painful feelings. And so as monks and even as meditators, we reflect on the use of our requisites. There are 4 requisites that we use, and we try our best to limit to these 4. Obviously, it's not always possible. There are other things that we need to use as well, but if we consider these 4, it helps remind us that really we don't need a lot, and all these other things that we might use, we can try our best to let them go and to focus only on what is most important. So we need clothing. This is why we have robes, because through contemplation the Buddha saw that this kind of simple cloth wearing would be the best for facilitating this lack of attachment towards clothing. Obviously, if we wear shirts, if we wear pants, if we wear dresses or hats or this kind of thing, it gets much more likely that we're going to become attached to these things. Whereas these robes are not beautiful, they're not overly pleasant or overly fancy, and that's the reason. For food, we try to rely on alms, and this is why it's so great for the meditators to be subject to this, because it's like you are practicing alms round. When the monks go out on alms in the village, they eat whatever it is that they get with no partiality, no choosing, no input in terms of what they might get to eat. And likewise, when you go to the kitchen, well, we try to have food that is suitable, and we try our best to accommodate, but it's a great practice to be content and to use the food. So we reflect that we're using this food not living to eat, but eating just to be alive. And of course, so we have the robes, we have the food, our rooms and our shelter and our accommodation, including our beds and seats and so on. This is why we try our best to sit on the floor, to have a simple, not luxurious, not overly comfortable way of life. We reflect that we use the room for its purpose. These rooms were built for meditation practice, and so when we're in our rooms, we're not using them to hide away our evil deeds. We're not using them to just sleep and so on. We're using them to seclude ourselves for the purpose of mindfulness, for the purpose of meditation. And medicines as well. Medicines aren't a big deal, except for some people they can be, where you might take painkillers, for example, for any little pain, and this is discouraged. Other people, another one is probably something like coffee or tea. Caffeine is a big one. People use it as a medicine. You're not using it, well, you're maybe using it just because you like the taste, but mostly we use it because it's a drug, and we think of it as a medicine, but it's really an abuse. For a meditator, because you don't need that kind of energy. You're not having to go to work, you're not having to use your brain in some kind of stimulating fashion. You're just cultivating mindfulness. And mindfulness is something that can occur even at the moment of drowsiness. You can be mindful of the drowsiness and so on. And you'll find that actually drugs and this sort of thing, painkillers or caffeine or any kind of stimulant of that sort, only leads to the ultimately to some sort of crutch, and it limits you in your mental and spiritual development. So these kinds of things should be avoided. You contemplate that you're only using it for its most important purpose. Obviously, if you're dying, you need medicine. If you have a debilitating illness, you need medicine. If the pain is racking and overwhelming, then, well, maybe you do need painkillers. The point being that we reflect on all the things that we use as a part of our practice. This isn't any deep sort of meditation practice, but it is a reminder, and it is a way of bringing mindfulness into our lives, where we can see how we're being unmindful and how it's like our practice is leaking. We have to stop the leak and keep the mindfulness from flowing out, meaning losing our mindfulness towards greed and attachment to food, for example, to clothing, and to possessions, many kinds of possessions that exist in the world. Of course, this is a teaching that people in the world can use as well, to avoid themselves from getting caught up in entertainment and pleasure and luxury and so on. They can live simple lives and really cultivate spiritual contentment, which is the best way to find peace, happiness, and freedom from suffering. Ultimately, that's what all these are for. The practice of sila, as I said, is for the purpose of cultivating samadhi, which means focus or concentration, where the mind sees things clearly as they are, which is the goal of samadhi being wisdom. Wisdom meaning, again, seeing things just as they are. And once you see things as they are, that's what leads to freedom from clinging, because you see that nothing is worth clinging to. So there's a real method, a meaning behind the practice of ethics that's much more than just being, say, a good person, or not being subject to being chastised or being looked down upon by wise people or that sort of thing. The reason why wise people would look down on you is because they'd see that if you're not keeping these ethical precepts, you have this shaky foundation that you could never build something wonderful or meaningful, and so your spiritual life is going to be shallow, is going to be ineffective. It's important that we have care in everything we do. We have care in the requisites we use, care in our lifestyle, our livelihood, that we have care in the rules and the precepts that were given by the Buddha for a reason. Even the monastic precepts, which sometimes seem, well, you could keep 8 precepts and that would be enough, but for a monk we have many, many more. Sometimes they might seem like a bother, and yet through years and years of practice you start to see how important they are for communal harmony, and for cultivating a place like this, which allows us to come together in practice. So, sile patithaya naro sapanyo, a wise one builds their foundation on ethics. And this is the fourfold ethics that the Buddha taught, and that was outlined in the Visuddhimagga by Buddhaghosa, that we follow as Theravada Buddhists. So, that's the Dhamma for today.